So 100% of your guests are female on Hit Like a Girl podcast. That would make
Correct.
sense, right?
Yes, correct.
What's interesting, so, and Joy, you can push back. You can be loud if you want to, but we set out as a goal to have 30% of our guests on our show be female representation. Do you know that's actually hard? I don't know why it's hard, but it's hard. First of all, we do a lot of shows. We do 3 shows a week. And generally speaking, there's a handful of things that happen. One is a lot of times I get pushback of, I don't know what I would talk about. So there's women that don't feel like they have a voice yet. Like they don't know what they would talk about. And I'm sitting there going, and I have to convince them, I'm like, are you kidding? You're incredibly accomplished, what you're doing in this area. So there's that aspect of it. The second is during COVID, I went out there and started doing field reports. And so it's CIOs or CTOs of organizations, hey, how are you handling COVID? And so we did that every day, 5 days a week for about 2 months. This year I got way out of whack because all I was doing was interviewing the CIOs and CTOs for these organizations, but the number ended up being like 10%, if that were actually female representations of executives within health IT that were running those major health systems. And so there's a representation problem and then there's a voice problem. Is that what you're finding still?
So one, we've heard the feedback that women haven't felt comfortable saying yes. Like a lot of conferences will say, hey, we asked a bunch of women to be a speaker and they actually turned us down. And I think that's also representative of the culture. If you don't see something as something that's regular, then you feel like, hey, I'm the outcast. I'm somebody who's going to be different. And do I feel comfortable having that level of attention? It's really uncomfortable. So I can imagine if you don't see very many examples of others doing it, it makes it more, you have to be that much more courageous or brave to be the one who decides to do it. So I think that might be part of it, where people are like, hey, you don't see the representation, so it's hard to say yes. Not to say that they wouldn't feel comfortable or have something meaningful to say, or it's just a matter of, hey, I'm alone up here. I don't necessarily want that level of attention. And Robin, what would you add to that?
No, we've heard this from people, especially I think earlier on in the first year. There's a little bit of imposter syndrome, but we've also run into people, Bill, that don't have just the same mindful commitment to even make the ask. We had a guest tell us that someone came to them and said, how could I have more female representation on my board? We were talking about this on the golf course. We asked some guys, and she said, yeah, you're probably not going to find a woman out on the golf course on Saturday with you in healthcare that's going to be a board member. So you should look somewhere else other than the golf course, was her advice. But I think 2 things, normalizing it like Joy said, but also the thing that I think there's more of an inclination for women to be storytellers. And when you can run a thread through that narrative and translate it for an audience, I think they do a really brilliant job of bringing vivid imagery to what's going on in an industry, what's going on especially for patients and others, and how this impacts people and communities and families. And so I think they have really something special to offer, but I applaud your mindfulness towards it to begin with, Bill, but you got to ask. If you don't ask, you don't get. And I think we're seeing more and more women subscribe to what my Nana told me, which is say yes and then figure out the rest. When someone gives you an opportunity, you take it and you go with it.